I'm Adam Erby. I'm Associate Curator here at George Washington's Mount Vernon, and I have sitting before me today the key to the Bastille, one of Mount Vernon's most iconic objects, and one of the very few that has been here at the mansion throughout its life. The key first was a gift from the Marquis de Lafayette to George Washington in March of 1790. It first hung in the presidential residences first in New York and then in Philadelphia, and then in 1797, after the presidency, it came back here to Mount Vernon, where it first hung in the Lafayette bedchamber, and then after that it moved down to the central passage. Many guests who came here in the 18th and 19th century mentions the fact that they saw the key to the Bastille hanging in the central passage as one of the most iconic objects that was there. So why is this key so important to us? First of all, March of 1790, the Marquis de Lafayette is caught up with the cause for French liberty. The Marquis de Lafayette first served under George Washington during the American Revolution, so he had the zeal for freedom. And in France at that point, they felt that they were having a very similar moment, that the French bourgeois, or the middle classes, were overthrowing the French government as it existed in autocratic monarchy, and they were going to create a new French Republic. The Bastille was a fortress in the middle of the city of Paris, which is where the monarch kept political prisoners, and an incredible symbol of the monarch's authority. So after the firing of Necker, Third Estate basically storms the Bastille, takes over the prison, and the National Guard in the National Assembly really took over the city of Paris. At that point, the Marquis de Lafayette was the head of the National Guard, and as such he received the key to the Bastille as a gift and a symbol of that overthrow. Lafayette sent Washington this key when hopes were still pretty high for the future of the French Revolution, and the Marquis de Lafayette wrote this wonderful letter to George Washington when he sent the key, and I'd like to read just a couple of lines from it. He said, "Give me leave, my dear General, to present you with a picture of the Bastille just as it looked a few days after I had ordered its destruction, with the main key of that fortress of despotism. It is a tribute to which I owe as a son to my adoptive father, as an aide-de-camp to my general, as a missionary of liberty to its patriarch." So the Marquis de Lafayette really saw this moment in France's history as sort of the next step of the American Revolution, the overthrow of these monarchies. The key, he sent it to Washington as a gift, first in the hands of Thomas Paine, the author of Common Sense, but at that point Thomas Paine decided he couldn't actually make it over to America. Paine then sent it through John Rutledge Jr. When the key arrived here, the capital was still in New York City. It arrived in New York, and it was a cause célèbre when it arrived. And the piece was traced for the newspapers, and an image of it almost immediately began to circulate in the papers as this great symbol of the French people breaking free, this great symbol of liberty. The key made its way to the MVLA, the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. It was one of the very few pieces that remained with the mansion throughout its life. After George Washington's death and Martha's death after that, it stayed with the mansion in the possession of Bushrod Washington, George Washington's nephew and a member of the Supreme Court. It continued in successive generations, and there it hung in the central passage. And virtually everyone who came to Mount Vernon saw this key, and they noted it in their journal when they came. In 1860, when the Mount Vernon Ladies Association took over the care of the Mount Vernon estate, they were given by John Augustin Washington III, the last private owner, this key. John Augustin Washington III must have seen this key as important to conveying the story of George Washington, and he wanted the Ladies Association to have it with a very few other objects. The Udon bust of George Washington is one of those objects, as is George Washington's globe. So three key symbols of George Washington that remain here throughout the piece's history. The key is outside the mansion this is a very rare occasion for us. It's outside the mansion as the original case, which is over 200 years old, is undergoing a bit of conservation. The case is a wonderful object, and it was described as a type of lantern for holding the key by one of Washington's visitors in 1798. It's an incredible object in and of itself that was made by Philadelphia craftsmen. But as with anything that's 200 years old, we need to continue to make sure it's taken care of to the highest standards. When we took it off view, we noticed a few structural instabilities with it, and we wanted to make sure that both the key and the case were kept in the best condition possible. So right now the case is off with our furniture conservators being taken care of. There's a missing element on the bottom of the carved ornament on the case that we will add back to it using the best documentary evidence we can find. We're also having this outer surface cleaned. There was a lot of bronze paint on the outside that has darkened, and we should have a brighter gold surface on the case itself. So when the case comes back, it'll be much brighter, but it'll still look 200 years old. It'll be reinterpreted a little bit, and we will have it on exhibition once again, and we will hope it survives for another 200 years in the mansion.